At 39, Lewis Hamilton thought he had seen everything in Formula One. 7 world championships, 22 years of racing, every type of competitor imaginable. Then he met a 16-year-old street racer from Sao Paulo who could drive faster than him. What Lewis did next would shock the racing world and change both their lives forever, but it started with a simple confrontation in the Monaco paddock, where security guards were trying to remove a kid in a torn racing suit who claimed he belonged there. Lewis Hamilton walked through the Monaco Grand Prix paddock on Thursday morning, his red Ferrari cap pulled low over his eyes. The familiar smell of burning rubber and fuel filled the air. Fans pressed against the barriers, calling his name and waving British flags. At T39, Lewis still felt the thrill of race weekend. But something was different now. Younger drivers were getting faster. His teammate Charles Leclerc had beaten him in the last 3 races. The whispers were getting louder. Maybe it's time, some reporters said. Maybe the old lion needs to step aside. Lewis tried to ignore the talk. He had 7 world championships. He was still Lewis Hamilton. But deep down, the doubts were growing. He was heading to the Ferrari motorhome when he heard shouting near the McLaren garage. 2 security guards in yellow vests were arguing with a teenager. The boy looked about 16, thin and tall, with dark skin and fierce brown eyes. He wore a torn racing suit that had seen better days. His helmet was old and scratched, held together with duct tape. "I belong here," the boy shouted in accented English. Portuguese, Lewis thought. "I'm faster than half these drivers." "Kid, you need to leave," one guard said, grabbing the boy's arm. "This is for real drivers only." "I am a real driver." The boy pulled away. "Give me a car, and I'll prove it." Lewis stopped walking. Something about the kid's voice made him listen. It wasn't just anger. It was hunger. Raw, desperate hunger that Lewis remembered from his own youth. "What's the problem here?" Lewis asked, walking over. The security guards recognized him immediately. "Mr. Hamilton." "Sorry, sir. This kid snuck in somehow. We're just removing him." Lewis looked at the boy. Up close, he could see the determination in those brown eyes. The kid's racing suit was homemade, stitched together from different pieces. But it was clean. Someone had taken care to make it look as professional as possible. "What's your name?" Lewis asked. The boy's eyes went wide. "You're Lewis Hamilton." "I asked your name." "Mateo Santos." The boy lifted his chin. "From Sao Paulo, Brazil." Lewis smiled. "Long way from home." "I saved money for 2 years to get here," Mateo said. "Worked 3 jobs. Slept in the airport. All to get to Monaco during race weekend." One of the guards rolled his eyes. "Sir, we get kids like this every race. They all think they're the next big thing." Lewis ignored the guard. "Why here, Mateo? Why Monaco?" "Because this is where real drivers prove themselves," Mateo said. "The streets are narrow. One mistake, and you're in the wall. It separates the good from the great." Lewis nodded. The kid knew his racing history. Monaco was indeed the ultimate test. "I've watched all your races," Mateo continued. "You're good, really good, but you're getting old. Your reflexes are slower. I can see it in your lap times." The security guards gasped. Nobody talked to Lewis Hamilton like that, but Lewis wasn't angry. He was impressed. This kid had guts. "You think you're faster than me?" Lewis asked. "I know I am," Mateo said without hesitation. Lewis studied the boy's face. There was no boasting, no cocky smile, just quiet confidence. The same confidence Lewis had felt at 16 when everyone said a black kid from Stevenage would never make it in Formula One. "Prove it," Lewis said. The guards looked confused. "Sir, the kid says he's fast. Let's find out." Lewis turned to Mateo. "You ever driven a real race car?" "I race every weekend in Sao Paulo," Mateo said. "Street circuits, real competition, street racing." Lewis raised an eyebrow. "That's illegal." Mateo shrugged. "So was your first karting race, probably. Everyone starts somewhere." Lewis laughed despite himself. The kid was right. Lewis's father had bent plenty of rules to get his son racing opportunities. "Follow me," Lewis said. They walked through the paddock, past the gleaming motorhomes and million-dollar equipment. Other drivers stared as Lewis Hamilton walked next to a kid in a torn racing suit. Reporters started taking pictures. Lewis led Mateo to the McLaren Technology Center's mobile simulator unit. It was after hours, and the facility was mostly empty. "You know what this is?" Lewis asked, pointing to the high-tech simulator. Racing simulator, Matteo said. I've seen them on YouTube. Lewis typed in his access code. The door clicked open. This isn't a video game, kid. This is the real thing. Professional drivers use this to learn tracks and test setups. Inside, the simulator looked like a real Formula One cockpit surrounded by massive screens. The seat was molded for a professional driver's body. The steering wheel had dozens of buttons and switches. You sure about this? Lewis asked. These machines cost more than most people's houses. Matteo climbed into the seat without hesitation. What track? Lewis smiled. Monaco. Since you said this is where real drivers prove themselves. Lewis set up the simulation. Monaco Grand Prix circuit, current weather conditions, full race setup. The most challenging track in Formula One, with walls on both sides and no room for error. I'll do 5 laps first, Lewis said. Give you a target. Lewis climbed into the simulator. Even after all these years, Monaco still demanded his complete attention. The virtual car responded exactly like the real thing. Every bump, every corner, every millimeter mattered. His first lap was a warm-up. His second was faster. By his 5th lap, he had found the limit. The time flashed on the screen, 1 minute and 12.847 seconds. That's a good time, Lewis said, climbing out. Faster than most drivers manage on their first try. Matteo said nothing. He just climbed into the still warm seat. Lewis watched as the boy adjusted the mirrors and checked the controls. Matteo's hands moved over the steering wheel like he had been driving Formula One cars his whole life. You ready? Lewis asked. Matteo nodded. The simulation began. Lewis watched the screens as Matteo's virtual car rolled out of the pits onto the famous Monaco street circuit. Turn 1, Saint Devote. Matteo took a conservative line, learning the feel of the car. Turn 3, Massenet. A bit more aggressive now, finding the racing line. By turn 6, the famous hairpin. Matteo was pushing harder. The car danced on the edge of control, but never stepped over the line. His first lap time, 1 minute and 15.234 seconds. Not bad for someone who had never driven a Formula One car. His second lap, 1 minute and 13.891 seconds. Much better. Third lap, 1 minute and 13.102 seconds. Now Lewis was paying attention. Fourth lap, 1 minute and 12.654 seconds. Lewis's heart began to race. Fifth lap, 1:12.298. Lewis stared at the screen. The kid had beaten his time by more than half a second. In 5 laps. Impossible, Lewis whispered, but the computer didn't lie. Matteo Santos, a 16-year-old street racer from Sao Paulo, had just outdriven 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton around Monaco. Matteo climbed out of the simulator, his face calm. Your racing line through the swimming pool section is too conservative, he said. You can carry more speed if you trust the car. Lewis looked at the data analysis on the screen. The kid was right. Matteo had found speed in corners where Lewis had been lifting off the throttle. Where did you learn to drive like that? Lewis asked. The streets taught me, Matteo said. In Sao Paulo, there are no safety barriers. No runoff areas. You crash, you get hurt. So you learn not to crash. Lewis felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Pure, honest amazement at another driver's talent. Who taught you racing lines? Breaking points. YouTube videos. Old races on TV. I study every lap, every corner. Matteo picked up his battered helmet. My grandmother says I'm obsessed. Your grandmother. She raised me after my mother died. Works cleaning offices to pay for our apartment. Matteo's voice softened. She doesn't understand racing, but she knows it makes me happy. Lewis felt a familiar ache in his chest. His own father had worked multiple jobs to fund Lewis's early racing career. The sacrifice, the hope, the dreams built on empty bank accounts, and pure determination. Why do you race, Matteo? The boy was quiet for a moment. Because when I'm driving, I'm not poor. I'm not from the favela. I'm not different. I'm just fast. Lewis nodded. He understood completely. They walked out of the simulator in silence. The Monaco paddock was quieter now. Most teams finished with their Thursday preparations. What happens now? Matteo asked. Lewis looked at this remarkable young man. Talented beyond belief, hungry beyond description, and carrying the dreams of everyone who believed in him. Lewis made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Now, Lewis said, We find out just how fast you really are. As they walked toward the paddock exit, Lewis pulled out his phone. He had calls to make, favors to ask, and a future to arrange. What Lewis didn't know was that Mateo Santos carried a secret about his past. A secret that would test everything Lewis thought he knew about loyalty, family, and the true cost of racing dreams. But that revelation was still to come. For now, Lewis Hamilton had found something he didn't know he was looking for, a reminder of why he fell in love with racing in the first place. 6 months earlier, Sao Paulo, Brazil. The sound of engines echoed through the narrow streets of Vila Madalena at midnight. Neon lights from late-night bars cast rainbow colors on the wet pavement. In the shadows between buildings, drivers gathered around their modified cars, checking tire pressure and adjusting suspension settings. This was Mateo Santos's world. "You ready, street boy?" called out Rico Mendez, a 25-year-old driver, with gold teeth and tattoos covering his arms. His bright yellow Honda Civic was worth more than most families earned in a year. Tonight's course goes through the old industrial district. Lots of tight corners, perfect for crashing. Mateo ignored the taunt. He stood beside his car, a 1995 Toyota Corolla that he had rebuilt with his own hands. The paint was faded, the body had small dents, but the engine purred like a cat. Every part had been chosen carefully with money saved from working at his uncle's garage. "The buy-in is 500 reals tonight," announced Rosa Lima, an older woman who organized the underground races. She had been his mother's best friend and looked out for Mateo like family. Winner takes all. Losers go home with empty pockets. 500 reals was a lot of money, almost 2 months of his grandmother's pension. But Mateo needed the cash. His grandmother, Elena Santos, required heart medicine that cost 800 reals every month. The government health system was slow and unreliable. If he didn't win tonight, they would have to skip her pills again. "You sure about this, boy?" Rosa whispered to him. "Rico's been winning races for 3 years. His car has twice the horsepower of yours." "It's not about the car," Mateo said quietly. "It's about the driver." The race route was brutal. 8 kilometers through Sao Paulo's most dangerous neighborhoods. Starting at Vila Madalena, racing through narrow residential streets, then into the industrial zone where abandoned factories created a maze of tight turns and blind corners. 12 cars lined up at the starting line. Most drivers were older, with expensive modifications and racing experience. Mateo was the youngest by 5 years. "Drivers, start your engines." Rosa raised a green flag. The sound was deafening. 12 engines roared to life, echoing off the apartment buildings. People came out onto their balconies to watch. Some cheered, others complained about the noise that Mateo's heart pounded as he gripped the steering wheel. This was what he lived for, the moment when nothing else mattered except speed, precision, and courage. 3, 2, 1, go. The cars exploded forward like bullets from a gun. Rico took the early lead in his powerful Honda. Mateo started in 5th place, staying calm while other drivers made risky moves and bumped into each other. The first section wound through residential streets barely wide enough for 2 cars. Mateo knew these roads like his own heartbeat. He had grown up playing soccer in these same streets. Every pothole, every narrow turn was stored in his memory. By the 3rd kilometer, he had moved up to 3rd place. His lighter car could take corners faster than the heavier, more powerful machines. "Come on, little Toyota," he whispered to his car. "Show them what we can do." The industrial section was the most dangerous part. Old factories and warehouses created a twisting path between concrete walls. One mistake meant crashing into solid stone at 60 kilometers per hour. This was where Mateo's street racing experience mattered most. While other drivers slowed down for safety, Mateo pushed harder. He had learned to read the road, to feel through the steering wheel exactly how much grip his tires had. He passed 2nd place, entering a sharp right turn. Now only Rico was ahead of him. The crowd at the finish line could hear the engines approaching. Rico's Honda had a distinctive high-pitched scream. Behind it, they heard the deeper growl of Mateo's Toyota. With 1 kilometer left, Mateo made his move. There was a slight straight section between 2 corners. Rico was taking the defensive inside line, trying to block any passing attempt. But Mateo saw something Rico didn't see. A small gap on the outside, barely wide enough for 1 car. It was risky because it meant driving closer to the concrete wall, With only centimeters of room for error, Matteo didn't hesitate. He pulled to the outside and pressed the accelerator harder. The two cars raced side by side at 90 kilometers per hour, separated by paint thickness. Rico tried to push Matteo into the wall, but the younger driver held his line perfectly. They entered the final corner together. Rico braked early, playing it safe. Matteo braked later, trusting his car's grip and his own judgment. The Toyota shot past the Honda like it was standing still. Matteo crossed the finish line 3 car lengths ahead. The crowd erupted in cheers and disbelief. The teenager in the old Toyota had beaten the underground racing king, but the celebration was cut short by the sound of screeching tires and breaking glass. Behind them, Carlos Rivera, a 19-year-old driver in a modified Volkswagen, had lost control coming out of the final corner. His car skidded sideways and smashed into a parked family sedan. The family sedan wasn't empty. Miguel Ortega had been driving home from his night shift at the hospital with his wife Carmen and their 8-year-old daughter Isabella. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Matteo heard the crash and immediately stopped his car. While other drivers celebrated or argued about the race results, he ran back toward the accident. Carlos's Volkswagen was upside down, leaking fuel. The family sedan was crushed on the passenger side. Matteo could hear crying from inside. "Help! Someone help us!" Miguel shouted from the driver's seat. He was trapped but conscious. His wife was unconscious, bleeding from a head wound. In the back seat, little Isabella was crying but seemed alert. "The car's going to catch fire." Someone yelled, "Stay back." But Matteo didn't stay back. He ran toward Carlos's overturned car first. The teenage driver was hanging upside down, trapped by his seatbelt and unconscious. Fuel was dripping dangerously close to the hot exhaust pipe. Matteo crawled under the wreckage, ignoring the sharp metal and broken glass. He cut Carlos's seatbelt with a knife from his toolkit and dragged the unconscious boy to safety just as small flames began to flicker near the fuel tank. Then he ran to the family's car. The passenger door was crushed shut, but the rear door could open. "I'm going to get your daughter out first," Matteo told Miguel. "Then we'll help your wife." "Be careful with Isabella," Miguel begged. "She's all we have." Matteo gently lifted the little girl from the back seat. She had cuts on her arms, but no serious injuries. He carried her to safety and handed her to Rosa, who had arrived with the crowd. Going back for Carmen was more difficult. She was unconscious and trapped by twisted metal. Matteo had to use a crowbar from his car to bend the door frame enough to pull her free. By the time the ambulances arrived, Matteo had saved 3 lives. His hands were cut and bleeding. His clothes were torn and covered in blood and fuel. But Carlos, Carmen, and Isabella were all breathing as the paramedics worked. On the injured, a man in an expensive dark suit approached Matteo. He was about 50 years old, with graying hair and intelligent eyes. Everything about him seemed out of place in this rough neighborhood. "You could have won that race and been celebrating right now," the man said. "Instead, you stopped to help strangers." "What?" Matteo was exhausted and shaken by what had happened. "Because it was the right thing to do. Most people would have kept driving. Racing is about winning, not playing hero." "Then maybe most people don't understand what racing really means," Matteo replied. The man smiled. "My name is Eduardo Velasco. I used to own a Formula One team in Europe. I've been watching these street races for months, looking for drivers with real talent." "What?" Matteo asked. "Because talent is common. Character is rare." Eduardo handed Matteo a business card. "You have both." Matteo looked at the card. It was simple and elegant, with just a name and phone number. "I can get you to Europe," Eduardo continued. "Real racing, professional tracks, a chance to compete against the world's best drivers." It sounded like a dream. Everything Matteo had ever wanted. But dreams usually came with a price. "What do you want in return?" Matteo asked. Eduardo was quiet for a moment, studying the young man's face. "I want you to trust me, and I want you to be ready for the biggest opportunity of your life." "When?" "Soon. Very soon." Eduardo started walking back to his car, then stopped. "One more thing, Matteo. The racing world is full of people who will try to use you, manipulate you, or control you. Always remember what you showed me tonight. Character matters, more than speed." As Eduardo's expensive car disappeared into the Sao Paulo night, Matteo held the business card and wondered if this mysterious stranger was his ticket to a better life or just another person trying to take advantage of a desperate kid from the favela. Rosa walked over to him, still holding little Isabella, who had fallen asleep in her arms. "Who was that man?" she asked. "I don't know," Mateo said honestly, "but I think he might change everything." What Mateo didn't know was that Eduardo Velasco had been watching him for months, and the wealthy stranger's interest in a poor street racer wasn't random or charitable. Eduardo had his own reasons for wanting to help Mateo Santos. Reasons connected to secrets that would soon turn the young driver's world upside down. But now Mateo just wanted to go home to his grandmother and tell her about the race money he had won. 800 reals would buy her heart medicine for another month. As he drove his battered Toyota through the empty streets of Sao Paulo, Mateo had no idea that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. Back in Monaco, Friday morning, Lewis Hamilton sat in his hotel room overlooking the Mediterranean Sea, but he wasn't enjoying the view. His laptop screen showed the data from yesterday's simulator session with Mateo Santos. No matter how many times he looked at the numbers, they told the same impossible story that a 16-year-old street racer had beaten him by more than half a second around Monaco. Lewis rubbed his tired eyes. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those lap times. 1 minute and 12.298 seconds. The number was burned into his memory. His phone buzzed with a text from Christina Milan, his girlfriend of 2 years. She was a successful tech entrepreneur who understood the pressure of being at the top of your field. "How did free practice go? Saw the photos of you with that kid yesterday. Media is going crazy." Lewis hadn't even thought about the photos. In today's world, everything was recorded. By now, pictures of him walking through the paddock with Mateo were probably all over social media that he scrolled through his Twitter feed. The racing websites had already picked up the story. Lewis Hamilton spotted with mystery teenager in Monaco paddock. Who was the unknown driver who gained access to McLaren simulator? Hamilton mentoring young talent, or just publicity stunt? Lewis closed the app. He didn't care about the publicity. What bothered him was the doubt growing in his chest like a cold weight. The T39. Lewis knew his reflexes weren't as sharp as they used to be. His reaction time was still excellent by normal standards, but Formula One wasn't normal. At this level, losing a few hundredths of a second meant the difference between winning and finishing fourth. Charles Leclerc had beaten him in the last 3 races. His Ferrari teammate was 11 years younger, hungry, and getting faster every weekend. The team tried to be diplomatic about it, but Lewis could see the truth in their data sheets that a knock on his hotel room door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," Lewis called. Toto Wolff entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Lewis's former team principal at Mercedes had remained a close friend even after Lewis's move to Ferrari. "You look terrible," Toto said, handing Lewis a cup. "Didn't sleep?" "Not much." Lewis accepted the coffee gratefully. "Thanks for coming." Toto sat in the chair across from Lewis. "I saw the news articles. You want to tell me what's really going on with this kid?" Lewis had called Toto at midnight, asking if they could meet privately. Their friendship went back 15 years. If anyone would give him honest advice, it was Toto. His name is Mateo Santos, 16 years old from Sao Paulo. "Yesterday, he beat my Monaco time in the McLaren simulator." "Beat your time?" Toto raised an eyebrow. "By how much?" 5.5 tenths. Toto was quiet for a long moment. In Formula One, 5 tenths was a lifetime. It was the difference between pole position and starting 10th on the grid. "You sure the sim was calibrated correctly?" Toto asked. "I checked everything twice. The kid is just that fast." Lewis stared out the window. "Toto, I've been racing professionally for 22 years. I've seen every type of talent. This is different." "Different how?" "Natural. Instinctive. Like he was born knowing things it took me years to learn." Lewis turned back to his friend. "It scared me." Toto studied Lewis's face. "You're worried he's better than you." "I'm worried about what that means." Lewis stood up and walked to the window. "My whole career, I've been the hungry one. The outsider, fighting to prove himself. Now I'm the old champion everyone wants to beat." "Lewis, you've won 7 world championships. You have nothing left to prove. That's the problem. When you have nothing left to prove, what's the point of racing?" Toto joined him at the window. Monaco looked peaceful in the morning light. Later today, It would be chaos as the fastest cars in the world raced through these same streets. "Tell me about this boy," Toto said. "What's his story?" Lewis shared. What he knew: the street racing, the poverty, the grandmother, the desperate hunger for opportunity. As he talked, he realized something. "He reminds me of myself at that age," Lewis said. "Not the background, but the attitude. Like the whole world is against him and racing is his only way to fight back." "So why does that bother you?" Lewis was quiet for a moment. "Because I remember what it felt like to be him. And I know what it feels like to be where I am now. Success changes you, Toto. It makes you comfortable. Comfortable drivers don't win championships." "You think you've gotten comfortable?" "I think I've gotten old." Lewis laughed bitterly. "Yesterday, talking to Matteo, I felt like the establishment. The thing I used to fight against." Toto nodded thoughtfully. "What do you want to do about it?" "I want to help him. Get him proper testing. See if his talent is real or just beginner's luck." "And if his talent is real?" Lewis hesitated. "Then I want to make sure he gets the chances I almost didn't get, even if helping him hurts your own career." That was the question Lewis had been avoiding all night. In Formula One, there were only 20 seats. Every new talent meant someone else got pushed out. Basic math. "My father worked 3 jobs to pay for my karting," Lewis said quietly. "He never complained, never made me feel guilty about the sacrifice. He just believed in me when nobody else would." "This isn't your son, Lewis." "No, but maybe that doesn't matter." Lewis turned away from the window. "Maybe what matters is passing on what I've learned. Being the person who gives chances instead of the person who takes them away." Toto smiled. "You sound like you've already made your decision. I want you to test him properly. Real track, real car, professional environment. If he's as good as I think he is, we find a way to get him into motorsport. And if he's better than you." Lewis met his friend's eyes. "Then I'll help him become champion." Toto was quiet for a moment. "You know this could backfire. The media will say you're creating your own replacement. Your sponsors might get nervous about your focus." "Let them," Lewis said. "I've spent my whole career proving I belong. Maybe it's time to help someone else prove they belong too." They shook hands on it. Toto promised to arrange a proper test session within the week. After Toto left, Lewis called Christina. "Hey," she said. "How are you feeling about today's practice?" "Nervous," Lewis admitted. "But not about the racing. The kid from yesterday. His name is Matteo? And Christina, he might be the most talented driver I've ever seen." "That's exciting. You could mentor him, help his career." "That's what scares me. What if mentoring him means ending my own career?" Christina was quiet for a moment. Lewis could picture her thinking, probably pacing around her apartment in London like she did when solving difficult business problems. "Lewis, remember when we first met? You told me the thing you loved most about racing wasn't winning. It was the moment when you pushed beyond what you thought was possible." "I remember." "When's the last time you felt that way?" Lewis realized he couldn't remember. Recently, racing had become about maintaining his position, protecting his legacy, avoiding mistakes. When had he stopped pushing beyond what seemed possible? "You're scared," Christina continued. "Not of losing to this kid, but of what it means. If you do, it means you're human. It means your time at the top isn't forever." That's a terrifying thought. It's also a liberating one. If your time at the top isn't forever, then you get to choose how it ends. You can fight to hold on and gradually decline, or you can go out on your own terms by doing something meaningful. Lewis smiled. Christina always knew how to cut through his confusion and get to the heart of things. "I love you," he said. "I love you too. Now go show everyone why you're still Lewis Hamilton." Lewis hung up and got ready for Friday practice. But his mind wasn't on his own lap times anymore. He was thinking about a 16-year-old kid from Sao Paulo who might just change everything. What Lewis didn't know was that at that exact moment, his phone was ringing with a call that would reveal information about Matteo's background. Information that would complicate everything Lewis thought he knew about the young driver. The caller had been investigating Matteo Santos for weeks, and what they had discovered would shock Lewis to his core. But Lewis was already in the elevator, heading down to the hotel lobby to meet his Ferrari team. The call went to voicemail, and the shocking revelation would have to wait. For now, Lewis Hamilton was about to face Friday practice at Monaco, carrying the weight of doubt about his own future and the burden of a promise he had made to help a stranger's son achieve impossible dreams. 2 weeks later, Circuit de Nevers Magny Cours, France. Dark clouds hung over the French countryside as Lewis Hamilton pulled into the private test facility. The weather forecast showed rain all afternoon, perfect conditions for what he had planned. If Mateo Santos was truly as talented as Lewis believed, wet weather would prove it. Anyone could be fast on a dry track with perfect grip, but rain separated the good drivers from the great ones. Rain demanded pure instinct, the ability to feel what the car was doing even when it was sliding on the edge of control. Lewis parked next to the Mercedes-AMG test car that Toto had arranged. The silver machine looked powerful and dangerous, like a wild animal waiting to be unleashed as a black sedan pulled up beside him. Mateo climbed out of the passenger seat, wearing a proper racing suit that actually fit. He looked nervous but determined. The driver of the sedan was Eduardo Velasco, the mysterious businessman who had appeared in Sao Paulo. Over the past 2 weeks, Eduardo had arranged Mateo's travel to Europe, secured proper racing licenses, and somehow found the money for professional equipment. Lewis still wasn't sure what to make of Eduardo. The man claimed to be a former Formula One team owner, but Lewis couldn't remember him from the paddock. There was something secretive about Eduardo, something that didn't quite add up. "Good morning, Lewis," Eduardo said, extending his hand. "Thank you for arranging this opportunity." "Good morning." Lewis shook hands but studied Eduardo's face. The man looked tired, like he hadn't been sleeping well. "Everything okay?" "Just nervous," Eduardo replied. "This is a big day for Mateo." Lewis turned to the teenager. "How are you feeling?" "Ready," Mateo said simply. But Lewis could see the excitement in his eyes. Toto Wolff arrived with a small team of Mercedes engineers and data analysts. They would monitor every aspect of the test: tire temperatures, suspension settings, braking points, steering inputs. If Mateo truly had extraordinary talent, the data would prove it. "Gentlemen," Toto said, "welcome to Magny Course. The track is 4.4 kilometers long with 17 corners. It's technical and demanding, especially in wet conditions." As if on cue, the first drops of rain began to fall. "Perfect timing," Lewis muttered. They moved to the garage where the Mercedes test car waited. It was a previous year's model, but still incredibly advanced. The steering wheel alone had 30 different buttons and switches. "Mateo," Toto explained, "this car has 800 horsepower and weighs only 700 kilograms. It can accelerate from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in 2.6 seconds. The brakes can stop it from 300 kilometers per hour in less than 4 seconds." Mateo nodded, absorbing every detail. "The most important thing," Lewis added, "is that this car will do exactly what you tell it to do, but it won't forgive mistakes. Every input has to be precise." Lewis would drive first to set a baseline. Even in the rain, he wanted to show Mateo what the car could do in experienced hands. He climbed into the cockpit and fired up the engine. The sound was incredible, a high-pitched scream that echoed off the garage walls. Lewis rolled out onto the wet track. The rain was getting heavier, creating rivers of water across the racing surface. This was Formula One at its most dangerous and beautiful. His first lap was cautious, learning how much grip the wet tires provided. The car felt alive beneath him, constantly moving and sliding as he searched for the limit. By his fifth lap, Lewis had found his rhythm. He attacked the corners with controlled aggression, using every millimeter of track width. The car danced on the edge of control, but Lewis kept it pointed in the right direction. His fastest lap time, 1 minute and 42.37 seconds. A respectable time for difficult conditions. Lewis returned to the garage, his heart pounding with adrenaline. Despite his doubts about aging and declining skills, he still loved this feeling. The pure challenge of man and machine against the laws of physics. "Your turn," he told Mateo. The teenager climbed into the still warm cockpit. He spent several minutes adjusting the seat, mirrors, and steering wheel position. Everything had to be perfect. "Remember," Lewis said over the radio, "start slow. Learn the car first, then push harder." Mateo pulled out of the garage into the heavy rain. Lewis watched the timing monitors as the young driver completed his first lap, 1:47.21. Slow and careful. Exactly what Lewis had advised. Second lap, 1 minute and 45.33 seconds. Getting faster. Third lap, 1 minute and 44.12 seconds. Now he was learning. By his fifth lap, Mateo was down to 1 minute and 43.45 seconds. still a second slower than Lewis, but improving rapidly. He's learning quickly, Toto observed, watching the data streams. His throttle control is already better than most professional drivers. Lewis nodded, but he wasn't surprised. Natural talent always showed itself quickly. Lap 8, 1 minute and 42.88 seconds. Now Matteo was only half a second behind Lewis's best time. Impossible, one of the engineers whispered. He's never driven a Formula One car before today. Lap 10, 1 minute and 42.15 seconds. Matteo had beaten Lewis's time. Lewis felt that familiar combination of amazement and fear. The kid was doing it again, but Matteo wasn't finished. Lap 12, 1 minute and 41.67 seconds. He was still getting faster. Lewis, Toto said quietly, I've been in this sport for 30 years. I've never seen anything like this. Lewis watched the sector times update in real time. Matteo was finding speed in corners where Lewis had been struggling. The kid seemed to have an instinctive understanding of where the grip was, even on a track he'd never seen before. Lap 15, 1 minute and 41.23 seconds. More than a second faster than Lewis in conditions that demanded years of experience to master. Bring him in, Lewis said over the radio. That's enough for today. Matteo returned to the garage, climbing out of the car with a huge smile. His racing suit was soaked with sweat despite the cool weather. How did it feel? Lewis asked. Like flying, Matteo replied. The car talks to you through the steering wheel, tells you exactly what it wants to do. Lewis nodded. That was exactly how he had described the feeling 20 years ago when he first drove a professional race car. Eduardo stood in the corner of the garage, tears streaming down his face. He was trying to hide his emotion, but Lewis could see it clearly. Your protege is quite talented, Toto told Eduardo. Where did you find him? Eduardo hesitated before answering. Sao Paulo street racing scene. I've been watching underground races for months, looking for natural talent. Lewis studied Eduardo's face again. Something about his answer didn't ring true. Why would a wealthy businessman spend months watching illegal street races? As the team packed up the equipment, Lewis's phone buzzed with a missed call notification. The same number that had tried to reach him in Monaco 2 weeks ago. This time, there was a voicemail. Lewis stepped outside the garage to listen to the message privately. Mr. Hamilton, this is Detective Carlos Mendoza from Sao Paulo Police. I've been investigating Eduardo Velasco and the young driver Mateo Santos. There are things about their relationship you need to know. Please call me back immediately. This is urgent. Lewis felt his blood turn cold. A police detective was investigating Eduardo and Mateo. What had they discovered? He walked back into the garage where Matteo was talking excitedly with the engineers about the car's handling characteristics. The kid looked so young, so innocent. What secrets was he hiding? Eduardo caught Lewis's eye across the garage. For just a moment, the older man's carefully composed mask slipped. Lewis saw fear there, and guilt, and something that looked like desperate love. Lewis, Eduardo said, walking over, can we talk privately? They stepped outside into the rain. Eduardo looked around nervously, making sure they were alone. There's something I need to tell you about Mateo, Eduardo began. Something I should have told you from the beginning. Lewis's phone buzzed again. Another call from Detective Mendoza. What is it? Lewis asked, his heart pounding. Eduardo took a deep breath. Mateo is my son. The words hit Lewis like a physical blow. Your son? I abandoned him and his mother 16 years ago. I was young, selfish, chasing my own racing dreams. When my career failed, I became… Eduardo's voice broke. I became a different person. An alcoholic. A failure. Maria was better off without me. Lewis stared at this man who had been lying to him for weeks. Does Mateo know? No. He thinks I'm just a businessman who wants to help his career. Eduardo's eyes filled with tears. I've been watching him from a distance for years, using my remaining connections to help when I could. When I saw his talent, I knew I had to do more. You've been lying to your own son. I've been protecting him from the truth about what kind of man his father really is. Lewis felt anger rising in his chest. He has a right to know. Does he? What good would it do to tell him his father is a failure who abandoned his family? Before Lewis could answer, they heard footsteps approaching. Mateo emerged from the garage, looking for them. Is everything okay? The teenager asked. Noticing the tension between the two men, Lewis looked from Eduardo to Mateo, seeing the family resemblance clearly now. The same fierce determination in their eyes, the same stubborn set to their jaws. Eduardo was pleading silently with Luis not to reveal the truth. Luis had to make a choice. Tell Mateo the truth about his father, or keep Eduardo's secret and become part of the lie. Everything's fine, Luis said finally. Just discussing your next test session. But as they walked back to the cars, Luis felt the weight of the secret settling on his shoulders. He had promised to help Mateo achieve his dreams. But those dreams were now tangled up in family secrets, police investigations, and lies that could destroy everything. The rain was getting heavier, washing the track clean for tomorrow's sunshine. But Luis knew that some stains couldn't be washed away so easily. That evening, French countryside near Magny-Cours, Luis couldn't stop thinking about Detective Mendoza's phone call as he drove back to his hotel. The rain hammered against his windshield, and the wipers struggled to keep up. Every few minutes, he glanced at his phone, debating whether to call the detective back. Eduardo and Mateo had left the track an hour earlier, heading to their own hotel. Luis could still picture the look in Eduardo's eyes when he begged Luis to keep his secret. The desperate love of a father who had thrown away his chance to be part of his son's life. Luis pulled into the hotel parking lot and sat in his car for a moment, engine running, trying to decide what to do. His phone buzzed. Again, Detective Mendoza, calling for the fourth time. This time, Luis answered. Detective Mendoza, Mr. Hamilton, thank you for taking my call. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. What's this about? Eduardo Velasco and Mateo Santos. I need to warn you about something important. Luis felt his heart racing. I'm listening. Eduardo Velasco isn't who he claims to be. Yes, he had connections to motorsport years ago, but he's been lying about his current situation. He's broke, Mr. Hamilton. Deeply in debt to dangerous people. What kind of people? Loan sharks. Gambling debts. Eduardo has been borrowing money he can't pay back, using Mateo's racing potential as collateral. Luis gripped the phone tighter. What do you mean, collateral? The people Eduardo owes money to aren't interested in racing. They're interested in Mateo for other reasons. Reasons that could put the boy in serious danger. Before Luis could ask more questions, he heard shouting outside his hotel window. In the parking lot below, he saw Eduardo's black sedan pulled up to the main entrance. Eduardo was arguing with someone on his phone, his voice carrying through the rain. I need more time, Eduardo shouted. The boy is close to signing with a major team. Luis couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but Eduardo's face was pale with fear. Where are you now? Detective Mendoza asked. At my hotel. Eduardo is here, and he looks scared. Don't approach him alone. These people he owes money to, they've been seen in France. They followed him from Brazil. Luis watched as Eduardo hung up his phone and looked around the parking lot nervously. Something was very wrong. Detective, what exactly is going on? Eduardo borrowed $200,000 from a crime family in Sao Paulo. He promised them access to Mateo when the boy becomes successful. They see Mateo as a future investment they can control. Luis felt sick. You mean they want to own him? Exactly. Fix races, manipulate results, use him for money laundering. Eduardo got desperate and made a deal with devils. Through his window, Luis saw Eduardo enter the hotel lobby. A moment later, Luis heard running footsteps in the hallway outside his room. Someone was pounding on a door down the hall. Mateo, open the door. Eduardo's voice was panicked. We have to leave. Now, Luis heard Mateo's door open. What's wrong? The teenager asked. Why are you shouting? Pack your things. We're going back to Brazil tonight. What? Why? The test went perfectly. Mr. Hamilton said he would help arrange more opportunities. There's been a change of plans. Luis quietly opened his own door and peered down the hallway. Eduardo was pushing Mateo back into his room, looking over his shoulder like he expected someone to appear at any moment. Detective, Luis whispered. Into his phone, they're trying to leave. Eduardo is forcing Mateo to pack. Don't let them go. Once they're back in Brazil, we can't protect the boy. Luis made a decision. He hung up the phone and walked down the hallway to Mateo's room. The door was still open, and he could hear arguing inside. I don't understand, Mateo was saying. You brought me all the way to Europe for this chance. Now you want to leave after one day. Sometimes plans change, Eduardo replied, stuffing clothes into a suitcase. This isn't the right opportunity. Louis knocked on the door frame. Both men turned to look at him. Is everything all right? Louis asked. That Eduardo's face went white. Louis, we decided to return home. Family emergency. Louis looked at Mateo, who clearly had no idea what family emergency Eduardo was talking about. Mateo, Louis said, can we talk privately? Whatever you need to say, you can say in front of me. Eduardo interrupted. Actually, I'd prefer to speak with Mateo alone. Eduardo stepped between Louis and the teenager. I'm sorry, but we really need to leave. Louis saw fear in Eduardo's eyes, but also something else. Love. Desperate, protective love for a son who didn't even know who he was. 5 minutes, Louis said firmly. Just 5 minutes with Mateo. Eduardo looked like he wanted to refuse, but Mateo spoke up. It's okay, the teenager said. 5 minutes won't hurt. Eduardo reluctantly stepped into the hallway, leaving Louis alone with Mateo. What's really going on? Mateo asked immediately. Eduardo has been acting strange all day. During the test, he looked like he was going to cry. Now he wants to leave. Without explanation, Louis studied the young man's face. Mateo deserved to know the truth, but which truth? That Eduardo was his father? That dangerous criminals were tracking them? That his racing dreams might be built on lies and debt? Mateo, what do you know about Eduardo's background? He said, he used to own a Formula One team. He's been helping young drivers find opportunities in Europe. What about your family? Your father? Mateo's expression hardened. My father left when I was born. My mother never told me his name. She said some people aren't strong enough to stay when life gets hard. Louis felt his heart breaking. The truth was right there, but how could he destroy everything Mateo believed about his life? Why are you asking about my father? Before Louis could answer, they heard shouting from the hallway. Eduardo was arguing with someone, but this time it wasn't a phone conversation. Where is the boy? A stranger's voice demanded in accented English. Louis looked out the door and saw 2 men in expensive suits confronting Eduardo. They looked dangerous, the kind of men who were used to getting what they wanted. He's not here, Eduardo lied. We sent him back to Brazil this morning. Don't lie to us, Eduardo. We know he's in this hotel. Louis quickly closed the door and locked it. What's happening? Mateo asked. We need to leave. Now. Through the window. What? Louis looked at this talented, innocent teenager who had no idea his life was in danger because of his father's mistakes. Mateo, I need you to trust me. Those men in the hallway aren't here to help your career. They're here to hurt you. I don't understand. Eduardo owes them money. A lot of money. And they think you're how he's going to pay them back. Mateo's face went pale. You mean they want to control my racing? They want to control everything. If we don't leave right now, you'll never have a choice about your own future again. Louis opened the window and looked down. They were on the 3rd floor, but there was a fire escape ladder on the side of the building. Can you climb? Louis asked. Mateo nodded, still in shock. Then let's go. They climbed out onto the fire escape as quietly as possible. The rain was still falling hard, making the metal ladder slippery and dangerous as they climbed down. Louis heard Eduardo's voice from the hallway above. Please, don't hurt him. He's just a boy. This is my fault, not his. Your fault, yes. But he's the solution. Louis and Mateo reached the ground and ran to Louis's rental car. As they drove away from the hotel, Louis saw Eduardo being forced into a black van by the 2 men in suits. They took him, Mateo said, watching through the rear window. Those men took Eduardo. We'll call the police, Louis promised. Why are you helping me? Mateo asked. You barely know me. Louis thought about all the lies, all the secrets, all the complicated truths he couldn't share. Because everyone deserves a chance to chase their dreams without being controlled by other people's mistakes. They drove through the rain-soaked French countryside, 2 refugees from a world that Mateo was only beginning to understand. Behind them, the hotel grew smaller in the mirror. Ahead of them was uncertainty, but also freedom. Louis knew they couldn't run forever. Eventually, they would have to face the truth about Eduardo, about the criminals who wanted to control Mateo's future, and about the family secret that connected everything. But for now, they were safe. And sometimes, being safe was enough to figure out what to do next. Mateo stared out the passenger window at the dark countryside rushing past. Eduardo isn't just a businessman, is he? he asked quietly. Lewis gripped the steering wheel tighter. No, he's not. Who is he really? Lewis looked at this brave young man who had already lost so much and was about to lose even more when he learned the truth. That's a conversation for when we're somewhere safe, Lewis said, but Lewis knew that. Safety was an illusion. The truth was chasing them through the rain, and eventually, it would catch up. 3 days later, Lewis's private training facility, England. Lewis's compound in the English countryside looked like something from a movie. The main house was modern and glass-fronted, surrounded by perfectly maintained gardens. But Matteo was more interested in the separate building that housed Lewis's personal racing simulator, gym, and workshop. This is where the real work happens, Lewis said, unlocking the door to the training facility. After their escape from France, Lewis had brought Matteo to the one place he knew they would be completely safe. The compound had security cameras, gates, and enough privacy to think clearly about their next move. Detective Mendoza had confirmed that Eduardo was alive, but being held by the criminals he owed money to. The Sao Paulo police were working with French authorities, but international investigations moved slowly. Eduardo will be okay, Lewis had assured Matteo. These people need him alive to get their money back. What Lewis hadn't told Matteo was the rest of Detective Mendoza's information. Eduardo's debts were larger than anyone realized. The criminals weren't just loan sharks. They were part of an organized crime family that used sports figures for money laundering. They saw Matteo as a perfect long-term investment, but for now, Lewis was focused on training. If Matteo was going to have a real racing career, he needed more than natural talent. He needed discipline, mental strength, and the technical knowledge that separated champions from fast drivers. Before we start, Lewis said, I need you to understand something. This isn't a vacation. I'm going to push you harder than you've ever been pushed. Some days you'll want to quit. Some days you'll hate me. Matteo nodded seriously. I'm ready. We'll see. Lewis's training program was brutal. They started each day at 5 in the morning with physical training, running, weightlifting, reaction time exercises. Formula One drivers needed to be athletes, not just people who could drive fast. Your body is part of the machine, Lewis explained. During their first workout, if your muscles get tired, your concentration slips. If your concentration slips, you crash. After physical training came simulator work. Lewis had recreated every major Formula One circuit in perfect detail. They spent hours studying racing lines, breaking points, and overtaking opportunities. Talent will get you to Formula One, Lewis said during a session at Silverstone. But knowledge will keep you there. Matteo absorbed everything like a sponge. His natural ability was obvious, but Lewis was impressed by his dedication to learning the technical aspects of racing. Why do you brake 50 meters later into turn 3? Lewis asked during a practice session. Because the track surface has more grip there, Matteo replied. The racing line has more rubber buildup from previous cars. Good. And why does that matter for tire temperature? Harder braking heats up the tires, which gives more grip for the next section. Lewis smiled. The kid was understanding racing at a level that took most drivers years to develop, but it wasn't all smooth progress. After 2 weeks of intense training, they had their first real argument. Lewis was reviewing Matteo's data from a virtual race at Monaco when he noticed something. You're being too aggressive in the hairpin, Lewis said. You're forcing overtaking moves that aren't there. But they worked, Matteo argued. I passed 3 cars in that corner. This time. But that kind of driving will get you killed in a real race. Matteo stood up from the simulator, frustration clear on his face. You're trying to make me drive like an old man. Cautious. Safe. That's not who I am. I'm trying to keep you alive long enough to become champion. Maybe you're just scared that I'm faster than you ever were. The words hung in the air between them. Lewis felt anger flash through his chest, but also recognition. He had said similar things to his own mentors 20 years ago. You think this is about my ego? Lewis asked quietly. I think you're trying to control me, just like everyone else. Lewis was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked to a cabinet and pulled out a box of old photographs and newspaper clippings. Sit down, he said that he spread the photos across the table. Pictures from his early racing career. Headlines about crashes, failures, and near misses. This is from 2007, Lewis said, pointing to a newspaper photo. My first season in Formula One. I thought I knew everything. I was fast, I was fearless, and I was stupid. The photo showed Lewis's car crashed into a gravel trap, wheels torn off, driver's helmet visible through the wreckage. What happened? I tried to make a pass that wasn't there. Just like you're doing in the simulator. I ended up in the hospital with a concussion and 3 broken ribs. Lewis pointed to another photo. This is from 2009. Another crash because I was too aggressive too early in my career. Matteo studied the images. In each one, Lewis looked young and angry, exactly like Matteo did now. I'm not trying to control you, Lewis continued. I'm trying to teach you what I learned the hard way. Speed without wisdom is just a fast way to get hurt. But you became champion, Matteo said. Eventually, after I learned to be smart along with being fast. Lewis looked at the young man. Your natural talent is better than mine was at your age. But talent alone doesn't win championships. Matteo was quiet, looking at the crash photos. I'm sorry, he said finally. I didn't know. You don't need to apologize for being hungry. That hunger is what will make you great. But you need to channel it properly. They got back to work, but the relationship had changed. Matteo began asking more questions, listening more carefully to Lewis's advice. And Lewis began sharing more personal stories about his own journey, the mistakes he had made, and the lessons he had learned. Christina Milan visited the compound during the 3rd week of training. She found Lewis and Matteo in the workshop, rebuilding an engine together. You're both covered in grease, she laughed. Real drivers understand their machines, Lewis explained. If you don't know how the engine works, you can't feel when something is wrong. Christina watched them work together. She could see how Matteo looked at Lewis, not just with respect, but with the trust of someone who had found a mentor worth following. Later that evening, Christina and Lewis walked through the gardens while Matteo studied race footage in the main house. He's like a son to you, Christina observed. He reminds me of myself at that age. Angry at the world, desperate to prove himself. And you're like the father you never had in racing. Lewis was quiet. His own father had been supportive but didn't understand the technical aspects of professional racing. Lewis had to learn most of it alone, through trial and error. Maybe, Lewis said, but there's something you should know about Matteo's real father. He told Christina about Eduardo, about the family connection, about the debts and the criminals who were still looking for them. Lewis, this is huge. You have to tell him. I know, but every day he gets stronger, more confident. I don't want to destroy that by telling him his father is the reason his life is in danger. He has a right to know. He has a right to become the champion he's capable of being. If learning about Eduardo destroys his focus, Christina stopped walking and turned to face him. You're not protecting him, Lewis. You're protecting yourself. What do you mean? You're scared that if he learns the truth about Eduardo, he'll leave. And you'll lose the closest thing you have to a son. Lewis felt the words hit him like a physical blow. Was that what this was about? Had he become so attached to Matteo that he was willing to lie to keep him close? Before he could answer, they heard shouting from the house. Matteo was standing at the window, talking on his phone, his face pale with shock. Lewis and Christina ran back to the house. What is it? Lewis asked. Matteo hung up the phone, his hands shaking. That was Detective Mendoza. They found Eduardo. Is he okay? He's alive. But Lewis. Matteo looked directly into his mentor's eyes. Eduardo told them everything. About who he really is. About why those men were after us. Lewis felt his heart stop. What did he tell them? He told them he's my father, and that you've known the truth this whole time. The training facility fell silent except for the sound of rain beginning to fall outside. Lewis looked at this young man who had trusted him completely, who had believed in him, who had become like family, and now that trust was broken. Matteo, I can't explain, but Matteo was already walking toward the door, grabbing his jacket. Where are you going? Lewis called. Away from here. Away from you. Away from all the lies. Matteo ran out into the rain, leaving Lewis standing in the training facility that had become a second home to both of them. Christina put her hand on Lewis's shoulder. You have to go after him. He doesn't want to see me. He's 17 years old, alone in a foreign country, with no money and no passport. He needs you, whether he wants to or not. Lewis grabbed his keys and ran out into the storm. Somewhere in the darkness, a broken teenager was running from the only person trying to help him. And Lewis knew this was his fault for keeping the truth hidden too long. That same night, English countryside train station, Lewis drove through the storm for 2 hours before he found Matteo. The teenager was sitting alone on a bench at a small train station, soaking wet and shivering. His phone was dead, his wallet empty, and the last train to London had already departed. Lewis parked his car and walked slowly across the platform. Matteo saw him coming, but didn't run. He just sat there in the rain, looking defeated. "The trains stopped running an hour ago," Lewis said, sitting beside him on the wet bench. "I know." Matteo's voice was barely a whisper. "Where were you planning to go?" "Home. Back to Sao Paulo. Back to my grandmother." Matteo wiped his eyes, though it was impossible to tell tears from rainwater. "But I don't even have money for a ticket." Lewis took off his jacket and put it around Matteo's shoulders. "You'll catch pneumonia sitting out here. Maybe I deserve it. For being so stupid." "You're not stupid, Matteo. You're hurt. There's a difference." They sat in silence for several minutes, listening to the rain drumming on the station roof. "He's really my father," Matteo said finally. "Eduardo, the man who abandoned my mother when she needed him most." "Yes. And you knew? This whole time you knew?" Lewis nodded. "He told me at the test track in France. He begged me not to tell you." "What?" Matteo's voice cracked with emotion. "Why did you lie to me?" Lewis looked at this remarkable young man who had trusted him completely. "Because I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared that if you knew the truth, you'd leave. Scared that I'd lose. The best thing that's happened to me in years." Matteo turned to look at Lewis. "What do you mean?" Lewis took a deep breath. "When I first saw you in Monaco, I was going through the worst period of my career. I was getting older, slower, and younger drivers were beating me. I felt like my time was over. But you're Lewis Hamilton, 7-time world champion. Championships don't stop you from getting old. They don't stop you from doubting yourself." Lewis stared across the empty train tracks. "Then I met you, and for the first time in years, I remembered why I fell in love with racing. Because of my speed, because of your hunger, your determination, the way you looked at racing like it was the most important thing in the world." Lewis smiled sadly. "You reminded me of myself 20 years ago, before success made me comfortable." Matteo was quiet, processing this information. "Training you these past weeks," Lewis continued. "Watching you improve, seeing you discover new things about racing. It gave me purpose again. Not just winning races for myself, but helping someone else become everything they could be." "So, you kept Eduardo's secret because you wanted to keep me around." "I kept Eduardo's secret because I didn't want to hurt you. But yes, I was also selfish. I didn't want to lose you." Matteo pulled Lewis's jacket tighter around his shoulders. "Tell me about him. About Eduardo. About my father." Lewis told him everything. About Eduardo's failed racing career, his descent into alcoholism, his debts to dangerous people. But also about the love Lewis had seen in Eduardo's eyes when he watched Matteo drive. "He made terrible choices," Lewis said, "but he never stopped caring about you. Everything he did, even the bad things, he did because he wanted to help your career, by borrowing money from criminals, by using the only connections he had left. It was stupid and dangerous, but it came from love." Matteo was crying now, no longer trying to hide it. "My mother died believing he was a coward who ran away when things got difficult. Maybe he was a coward then. But what he did in France, facing those criminals to protect you, that wasn't cowardly. She worked 3 jobs to support us. She never complained, never asked for help. She just kept believing that someday I'd make it as a driver." Matteo's voice broke. "She died before she could see any of it come true." Lewis put his arm around Matteo's shoulders. "She saw the most important part. She saw who you became. A young man with talent, character, and the courage to chase impossible dreams. I don't know what to do now. Eduardo is probably going to prison. Those criminals are still looking for me, and I can't afford to continue racing without help." Lewis was quiet for a long moment. He had been avoiding thinking about the practical realities of Matteo's situation. But sitting here in the rain, he realized there was only one solution. "What if I told you there was a way to guarantee your future in Formula One?" Lewis asked. "What do you mean?" "Frederic Vasseur at Ferrari has been watching your test footage. He wants to offer you a development contract." Matteo's eyes widened. "Ferrari wants to sign me? There's just one problem. Their budget only allows for one superstar salary. If they sign you to a full contract, they can't afford to keep me. The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. You mean you'd have to retire? I'd have to step down from my Ferrari seat. At my age, with my contract situation, that basically means retirement. Matteo stared at Louis in shock. You'd give up your career for me? I'd give up the end of my career to help you start yours. No. Matteo stood up from the bench. I won't let you do that. It's not your choice to make. Yes, it is. You're Lewis Hamilton. You still have more to give. I've watched your telemetry, data, your lap times. You're not finished. Louis smiled. You sound like my girlfriend. She says the same thing. Because it's true. Just because I'm fast doesn't mean you're slow. Matteo, I'm 39 years old. In racing years, that's ancient. My reflexes are declining whether I admit it or not. Then fight it. Don't give up your seat. Make them earn it. Louis looked at this young man who was refusing to take the easy path to success. What are you saying? I'm saying find another way. Find a solution that doesn't require you to sacrifice everything you've worked for. There might not be another way. Then we make one. Matteo's eyes were fierce with determination. You taught me that racing isn't just about being fast. It's about being smart. So let's be smart about this. They sat back down on the bench, both of them thinking. What if, Louis said slowly, what if we proposed something unprecedented? Like what? A mentorship program. 2 drivers sharing 1 seat for 2 years. I race half the season while training you to take over completely. Would Ferrari agree to that? I don't know. It's never been done before. But you're right about one thing. I'm not ready to stop racing. And you're not ready to carry the pressure of being Ferrari's only driver. Matteo nodded thoughtfully. We could learn from each other. You could teach me about pressure and consistency. I could push you to rediscover your speed. It would buy us time to figure out what to do about Eduardo and those criminals. And it would give me a chance to prove I belong in Formula One without taking away everything you've earned. Louis felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Genuine excitement about the future. Not fear about losing his place, but excitement about creating something new. There's one condition, Louis said. Complete honesty between us. No more secrets. Agreed. But that goes both ways. You have to stop protecting me from difficult truths. They shook hands on it. Mentor and student becoming equal partners in an uncertain future. We should call Vasseur tomorrow, Louis said. Present this idea before Ferrari makes their final decision. What if they say no? Then we find another team that's willing to take a chance on something different. As they walked back to Louis's car, Matteo asked the question that had been bothering him all night. Louis, why are you really doing this? Helping me, training me, now proposing to share your seat? What do you get out of it? Louis thought about how to answer honestly. When I was your age, I had my father supporting me. He wasn't a racing expert, but he believed in me completely. That belief gave me the strength to overcome every obstacle. And you don't have that. Your mother is gone, and your father made mistakes that put you in danger. So maybe I'm trying to be what you need. Someone who believes in you completely. What about what you need? Louis smiled. I need to know that when I'm done racing, the sport will be in good hands. I need to know that all the barriers I broke down won't just close up again after I'm gone. You think I can do that? I think you can do anything you set your mind to, but only if you stay alive long enough to try. They drove back through the countryside toward Louis's compound. Behind them, the train station disappeared into the darkness. Ahead of them was an uncertain future, but they would face it together. What neither of them knew was that Christina had spent the evening making phone calls of her own. She had contacted Detective Mendoza, Ferrari management, and even reached out to Rosa Lima in Sao Paulo that morning. There would be news that would change everything they thought they knew about their situation. News that would test whether their new partnership could survive another shocking revelation. But for now, they were just a mentor and student who had found something more valuable than individual success. A shared purpose that neither could achieve alone. The next morning, Louis's compound. England Louis woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Christina's voice coming from the kitchen. She was on the phone, speaking in rapid Portuguese. He checked the clock, 6:30 a.m. Christina never woke up early unless something important was happening. Matteo was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open. He looked better than he had the night before, but Louis could see the emotional exhaustion in his eyes. Good morning, Louis said, pouring himself coffee. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. I've been reading about shared drive contracts in motorsport. Turns out it's been done before, just never in Formula 1. Christina hung up her phone and turned to face them both. We need to talk. All of us. What's wrong? Lewis asked, recognizing the serious tone in her voice. I've been making calls since you two left last night. Detective Mendoza, Rosa Lima, in Sao Paulo, and some contacts at Ferrari. Christina sat down across from them. There are things you need to know before you call Vasseur today. Lewis felt his stomach tighten. What kind of things? First, the good news. Eduardo is safe. The French police raided the hotel where he was being held. The criminals who kidnapped him are in custody. Matteo looked up from his laptop. And Eduardo? He's in protective custody while the investigation continues. But he's physically unharmed. What's the bad news? Lewis asked. Christina hesitated. Ferrari already knows about the shared seat idea. What? How? Vasseur's been talking to Toto Wolff. They've been discussing Matteo's potential for weeks, ever. Since the test at Magny Cours. Lewis felt betrayed. Toto didn't tell me he was talking to Ferrari behind my back. Because he knew you'd react exactly like this, Christina said gently. Lewis, they're not plotting against you. They're trying to find a solution that works for everyone. What kind of solution? Christina pulled out her phone and showed them an email. Vasseur sent this an hour ago. Ferrari is willing to offer both of you multi-year contracts under something. They're calling the Hamilton Legacy Program. Lewis read the email over Christina's shoulder. The terms were generous, full salary for both drivers, alternating race weekends for the first year, then a gradual transition as Matteo gained experience. This is too good to be true, Lewis said. What's the catch? There's a performance clause neither of you knew about, Christina said quietly. What kind of clause? Whichever driver performs better over the 2-year period gets the permanent seat. The other? Christina paused. The other gets released from the team with no guarantees. The kitchen fell silent. Lewis stared at the email, reading the fine print he had missed the first time. They want us to compete against each other, Lewis said. It makes sense from their perspective, Matteo said quietly. They get 2 drivers for the price of 1.5, and they get to see which one deserves the long-term investment. Lewis looked at the young man he had been training for weeks. You understand what this means? It means one of us is going to lose everything. Are you okay with that? Matteo closed his laptop and looked directly at Lewis. Are you? Before Lewis could answer, Christina's phone rang again. She looked at the caller ID and frowned. It's Rosa Lima from Sao Paulo. She says it's urgent. Christina answered in Portuguese, listened for several minutes, then hung up with a shocked expression. What is it? Lewis asked. Rosa found something in Maria Santos's belongings. Something Eduardo didn't know existed. What kind of something? A letter, written by Maria to Matteo before she died. She left it with Rosa, with instructions to give it to Matteo only if he ever made it to professional racing. Christina handed Matteo her phone. Rosa is going to read it to you. Matteo took the phone with shaking hands. He put it on speaker so Lewis and Christina could hear that Rosa's voice came through clearly, speaking English with a heavy accent. Meu querido Matteo, if you are hearing this, it means your dreams have come true. You have become the racing driver I always knew you could be. Lewis saw tears forming in Matteo's eyes. I need to tell you about your father. His name is Eduardo Velasco, and he is not the villain I sometimes made him seem. Matteo's hands tightened on the phone. When I was pregnant with you, Eduardo was struggling with his own failed racing career. He drank too much, made bad decisions, borrowed money from dangerous people. I chose not to tell him about you because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Matteo whispered. Afraid that if he knew about you, those dangerous people would use you against him. Afraid that his problems would become your problems. So I let him believe I never wanted to see him again. Lewis felt his heart breaking for both father and son. But I was wrong, meu filho. Eduardo tried many times to contact us over the years. He sent money when he could, always from different addresses so no one could trace it back to him. He was protecting us the only way he knew how. The kitchen was completely silent except for Rosa's voice reading Maria's words. I know this will be confusing, maybe even painful to learn. But Eduardo loves you. He always has. His absence was not abandonment, it was sacrifice. Lewis watched Matteo's face as the truth slowly sank in. If you have found success in racing, I hope you will find room in your heart to forgive both of us. Eduardo for the mistakes he made, and me for keeping you apart. Rosa's voice continued. The letter ends with this. Your father gave you his talent. I tried to give you his strength. Together, I hope we gave you everything you need to chase impossible dreams and catch them. Rosa stopped reading. The phone call ended with gentle goodbyes and promises to stay in touch. Mateo set the phone down carefully, as if it might break. All these years, he said slowly, I thought he abandoned us. But he was trying to protect us. And Eduardo thought. You and your mother hated him, Lewis added. Both of you have been carrying guilt that wasn't yours to carry. I need to see him, Mateo said suddenly. I need to talk to Eduardo. To my father. Cristina nodded. Detective Mendoza said that might be possible. Eduardo specifically asked to speak with you when he learned you were safe. Lewis felt the weight of this revelation settling over all of them. The story he thought he understood about abandonment and betrayal was actually about love and sacrifice. This changes everything, Lewis said. How? Mateo asked. The Ferrari contract. The performance clause. Everything we discussed last night. Lewis stood up and walked to the window. If Eduardo sacrificed his relationship with you to keep you safe, how can I compete against you for something you've dreamed about your entire life? The same way I can compete against you, Mateo replied. By giving everything I have and accepting whatever happens. Lewis turned back to face him. You're not afraid of the competition. I'm terrified. You're Lewis Hamilton. You've won more championships than anyone except Michael Schumacher. But fear isn't a reason to avoid challenges. Cristina smiled at both of them. You know what I think? What? They asked together. I think Ferrari is getting exactly what they hoped for. Two drivers who will push each other to be better than either could be alone. Lewis realized she was right. The performance clause wasn't just about competition. It was about creating a situation where both drivers would have to exceed their own limits. There's something else, Lewis said. Something I haven't told you about this contract. What? Lewis took a deep breath. If I lose the performance competition, it doesn't just mean losing my Ferrari seat. At my age, it probably means the end of my career entirely. Mateo was quiet for a moment. And if I lose? You're 17 years old. You'd have other opportunities. But not with you as my mentor. Not with this chance to learn from the best. Lewis nodded. The stakes were clear. Now, for Lewis, it was legacy versus retirement. For Mateo, it was dreams versus starting over. So what do we do? Mateo asked. Lewis looked at this remarkable young man who had become like family to him. We signed a contract. We compete with everything we have. And we trust that whatever happens, we'll both be better for having tried. Even if it means one of us loses everything. Especially if it means that. Because that's what your mother's letter was really about. Sometimes love means risking everything for someone else's chance to be great. Mateo stood up and extended his hand to Lewis. Partners. Partners. Lewis agreed, shaking hands. But when we're on track, we're competitors. I wouldn't have it any other way. As they prepared to call Vasseur and accept Ferrari's offer, none of them knew that the performance clause contained one more secret. A secret that would only be revealed if one driver significantly outperformed the other. But that revelation would have to wait. For now, they had a contract to sign and a future to build together. Even if that future meant eventual separation, the Hamilton Legacy program was about to begin. And neither Lewis nor Mateo could predict how it would change both their lives. 6 months later. Autodromo Jose Carlos Pace, Sao Paulo, Brazil. The roar of 200,000 Brazilian fans filled the air as Lewis Hamilton stood in the Ferrari garage, watching Mateo Santos prepare for the most important race of his young life. The 2025 Brazilian Grand Prix was Mateo's home race, and the pressure was enormous. The Hamilton Legacy program had been everything Ferrari hoped for and more. Over 6 months of shared racing, Lewis and Mateo had pushed each other to new heights. Lewis had rediscovered speed he thought was lost forever, while Mateo had learned consistency and racercraft that normally took years to develop. But the performance clause was taking its toll. After 12 races, Mateo led the internal competition by 23 points. His raw speed was undeniable, and the fearless racing style Lewis had tried to control was actually working at the highest level. The kid was beating seasoned champions who had decades of experience. Lewis, meanwhile, was driving some of the best races of his career. At 39, he was more motivated than he had been in years. But motivation couldn't overcome the simple math of aging reflexes and a competitor with nothing to lose. "How are you feeling?" Lewis asked Matteo, who was reviewing track data on his tablet. "Nervous," Matteo admitted. "My whole country is watching. My grandmother is here." Rosa flew in from Sao Paulo. "Even Eduardo." Lewis looked across the paddock where Eduardo Velasco stood with Detective Mendoza. After months of legal proceedings, Eduardo had been cleared of criminal charges and granted supervised visitation with his son. The reunion had been emotional and difficult, but they were slowly rebuilding their relationship. "Eduardo is proud of you," Lewis said. "We all are. What if I crash? What if I let everyone down?" Lewis sat beside his protege and partner. "You know what I've learned over 7 world championships? What? The pressure never goes away. You just get better at carrying it." Lewis pointed to the packed grandstands. "Those people aren't here hoping you'll fail. They're here hoping you'll fly." Matteo nodded, but Lewis could see the weight of expectations in his young eyes. Christina Milan approached them, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She had become like family to Matteo over the past months, often serving as the neutral voice when Lewis and Matteo's competitive instincts created tension. "The weather report shows possible rain for the race," she said. "How do you feel about that, Matteo?" "Rain is where I learned to drive," Matteo replied. "Sao Paulo streets are always wet." Lewis smiled. In wet conditions, experience usually trumped raw speed. If it rained, Lewis might have an advantage. But he also knew that Matteo's street racing background made him dangerous in any conditions. Frederic Vasseur called both drivers to a team meeting. The Ferrari principal had been pleased with the Legacy program's results, but Lewis could see concern in his eyes. "Gentlemen," Vasseur began, "you both know the situation. After today's race, we'll be 2/3 through the evaluation period. Matteo currently leads the internal standings." Lewis nodded. He knew the numbers better than anyone. However, Vasseur continued, "There's something about the performance clause I haven't told you." Lewis felt his heart skip. "What? If one driver leads by more than 50 points after the Brazilian Grand Prix, the evaluation period ends early. That driver gets the permanent seat immediately." Lewis did the quick math. Matteo was 23 points ahead, a win while Lewis finished outside. The points would give Matteo exactly 50 points advantage. "You're saying today could decide everything?" Matteo asked. "Potentially, yes." Lewis looked at Matteo, who was processing this information with surprising calm. "Does that change anything for either of you?" Vasseur asked. "No," both drivers said. Simultaneously, Vasseur smiled. "Good. Because Ferrari doesn't want drivers who hold back when everything is on the line." As they prepared for qualifying, Lewis reflected on how much had changed since that night in Monaco when he first met Matteo. The scared, desperate teenager was now a confident Formula One driver who belonged at the highest level of motorsport. But belonging and succeeding were different things. Qualifying took place under threatening skies. Lewis, drawing on 20 years of experience, managed to secure 4th position on the grid. Matteo, still learning the intricacies of tire management and setup optimization, qualified 12th. "Starting that far back makes winning very difficult," Lewis told Matteo after qualifying. "Difficult, not impossible," Matteo replied. "I've watched every one of your comeback drives. Brazil 2008, Turkey 2020, Silverstone 2021. You taught me that races aren't won on Saturday." Lewis felt pride and worry in equal measure. Matteo was adopting his never-give-up mentality, which was exactly what made him dangerous. That evening, Eduardo visited Matteo in his hotel room. Lewis respected their privacy, but couldn't help wondering how the conversation was going. Father and son were still learning how to be family again. Rosa Lima found Lewis in the hotel bar, nursing a single glass of wine and staring out at the Sao Paulo skyline. "You look like a man carrying the weight of the world," she said in accented English, sitting across from him. "Just thinking about tomorrow," Lewis replied. "About losing to the boy you trained." Lewis was surprised by her directness. "Is it that obvious? I raised that boy alongside his mother. I know what he's capable of when he's motivated." Rosa sipped her drink. "But I also know you, Lewis Hamilton. You don't lose races you need to win." "I'm not 25 anymore, Rosa." "No, you're better. You're smarter, more complete. Age is only a disadvantage if you let it be." Lewis appreciated her confidence, but he felt the truth in his bones. His reflexes were a fraction slower than they used to be. His willingness to take extreme risks had diminished. Against most drivers, that didn't matter. Against Mateo Santos, it might be everything. Race morning dawned gray and threatening. By the time the drivers reached the circuit, the first drops of rain were beginning to fall. "Perfect," Lewis murmured, remembering his conversation with Christina about wet weather favoring experience. But as he watched Mateo in the pre-race briefing, Lewis saw no fear in the young man's eyes. Only determination and hunger. The formation lap was chaotic, with several drivers struggling to keep their cars under control on the increasingly wet track. Lewis felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with racing in dangerous conditions. As they lined up on the grid, Lewis caught Mateo's eye in the mirrors. The young Brazilian gave him a small nod, acknowledgement between competitors who respected each other completely. "Drivers, start your engines." 20 powerful Formula One cars roared to life, their engines echoing off the grandstands filled with passionate Brazilian fans. Lewis had started from fourth position many times before, but never with so much at stake, and never against someone he cared about as much as Mateo. The lights began their sequence. 5 red lights appeared one by one. Lewis gripped his steering wheel and prepared for what might be the most important race of his life. All 5 lights went out. The 2025 Brazilian Grand Prix had begun. Lewis got a perfect start, moving up to second place before the first corner. Behind him, chaos erupted as drivers struggled with the wet conditions and close racing. Through his mirrors, Lewis saw Mateo threading through the pack like a man possessed. By the end of the first lap, the teenager had already gained 5 positions. "This is going to be some race," Lewis said to himself, settling in for what he knew would be a battle that would determine both their futures. The rain was getting heavier, making the track treacherous and unpredictable. But Lewis felt more alive than he had in years. This was Formula One at its purest, man and machine against the elements, with everything on the line. Behind him, Mateo Santos was driving the race of his life, proving that sometimes the student really can surpass the teacher. What neither of them knew was that this race would be remembered as one of the greatest in Formula One history, not just for the driving, but for what it revealed about character, sacrifice, and the true meaning of legacy. Brazilian Grand Prix. Final chapter. The first 10 laps of the race were pure chaos. The rain turned Interlagos into a skating rink, with cars sliding and spinning at every corner. Lewis, starting from fourth, had moved up to second place behind race leader Max Verstappen. His experience in wet conditions was showing as younger drivers made costly mistakes. But it was Mateo's drive that had the entire paddock talking. Starting from 12th position, the Brazilian teenager was carving through the field like a surgeon with a scalpel. By lap 15, he had climbed to 6th place. By lap 25, he was 4th. The wet conditions that terrified other drivers seemed to energize him. "Look at Sector 2, Christina said to Eduardo in the Ferrari garage, pointing at the timing screens. "Mateo is 3/10 faster than anyone else through that section." Eduardo watched his son's progress with tears in his eyes. This was the racing he had dreamed of as a young man, but never achieved. Seeing Mateo succeed felt like redemption for all his past failures. Meanwhile, Lewis was battling his own demons. He could see Mateo approaching in his mirrors, could feel the younger driver's hunger like a physical force. Every instinct told him to defend his position, to use every trick he had learned over 2 decades of racing. But another voice in his head, the voice of the mentor he had become, was saying something different. On lap 32, Mateo made his move on the car in 3rd place, passing Charles Leclerc with an aggressive maneuver that left the crowd gasping. Now only Lewis stood between Mateo and race leader Max Verstappen. "Mateo is in 3rd place," came the radio message to Lewis. "He's closing on your position rapidly." Lewis looked in his mirrors and saw the distinctive red and white helmet of his protege. The kid was driving with the fearless precision Lewis remembered from his own youth. With 15 laps remaining, Mateo caught up to Lewis. The 2 Ferrari drivers circled the track nose to tail, separated by mere meters, but connected by months of shared training and mutual respect. Lewis knew what was coming. Mateo would attempt a pass, probably at turn 1 where the racing line offered an opportunity. Lewis could defend aggressively, force Matteo to take risks that might result in a mistake, or he could do something else entirely. Rosa Lima stood in the grandstands with Matteo's grandmother Elena, both women clutching each other as they watched. Their boy challenged the 7-time world champion. "He's going to try to pass Lewis," Elena said, her voice barely audible over the crowd noise. "Lewis will defend," Rosa replied. "He has to. His own career depends on it." But Rosa was wrong. As they approached turn 1 on lap 45, Lewis did something that shocked everyone watching. Instead of defending the inside line, he moved slightly to the outside, creating a perfect slipstream for Matteo to draft behind him. The move was so subtle that most spectators didn't notice it. But Matteo understood immediately. Lewis was giving him the opportunity to pass, sacrificing his own position for his student's success. Matteo used the slipstream to pull alongside Lewis down the main straight. They raced wheel to wheel at 180 miles per hour, mentor and student, separated by inches and united by trust. As they approached the braking zone for turn 1, Matteo had the inside line. He was past Lewis and into second place. The Ferrari garage erupted in celebration, but Lewis wasn't finished yet. Over the radio, Lewis spoke directly to Matteo. "Your mother didn't raise a quitter. Show them what street racing taught you. Show them what being hungry feels like." The words electrified Matteo. This wasn't just about racing anymore. This was about honoring his mother's memory, his grandmother's sacrifices, and his father's redemption. With 10 laps remaining, Matteo set his sights on Max Verstappen. The Dutch champion was struggling with tire wear and the increasingly difficult conditions. Matteo, energized by Lewis's words and the roar of his home crowd, began closing the gap. Lewis, now in third place, became Matteo's wingman. When other drivers tried to pass Lewis and potentially interfere with Matteo's charge, Lewis defended with all his championship experience. He was no longer racing for himself. He was racing for Matteo. With 5 laps to go, Matteo caught up to Verstappen. The Red Bull driver was pushing hard to maintain his lead, but his car was starting to struggle in the wet conditions. The pass came at turn 4, the famous S corner that had seen countless legendary moments. Matteo took a line that shouldn't have worked: too tight, too aggressive, too risky. But his street racing instincts guided him through, and suddenly he was alongside Verstappen. They raced side by side for 3 corners, neither giving an inch. The crowd was on its feet, 200,000 voices creating a wall of sound that could be heard for miles. Finally, coming out of turn 7, Matteo pulled ahead. The Brazilian crowd exploded in celebration as their unknown street racer took the lead of the Brazilian Grand Prix. Lewis, watching from third place, felt something he had never experienced before: pure joy at someone else's success. This was better than any championship he had ever won. The final 3 laps were a victory parade for Matteo, but also a demonstration of racecraft. He controlled the pace perfectly, managing his tires and maintaining his lead despite the pressure from Verstappen. As the checkered flag waved, Matteo Santos crossed the finish line as the winner of his home race. Behind him, Lewis finished third, having given up his own chance at victory to help his protege achieve greatness. In the Ferrari garage, Eduardo collapsed to his knees, overwhelmed by emotion. His son, the boy he had thought he lost forever, had just won a Formula One race. Detective Mendoza, who had flown in to witness the race, put his hand on Eduardo's shoulder. "Maria would be proud," he said simply. The podium ceremony was magical. Matteo stood on the top step, tears streaming down his face as the Brazilian national anthem played. Lewis stood on the third step, applauding louder than anyone. After the ceremony, Matteo found Lewis in the paddock. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you help me when you could have won yourself?" Lewis smiled, remembering a similar conversation months ago at a rain-soaked train station. "Because seeing you succeed matters more to me than my own success. That's what real mentorship means." Matteo embraced his mentor, and for a moment they were no longer competitors but family. Frederic Vasseur approached them with news that would determine their futures. "Gentlemen, with today's results, Matteo now leads the performance standings by 47 points. However, Ferrari has made a decision." Both drivers held their breath. "We're offering permanent seats to both of you." Today's race showed us that the Hamilton Legacy program isn't just about finding one great driver. It's about creating a partnership that makes both drivers better. Lewis felt relief wash over him. His career would continue. But more importantly, Mateo's future was secured as the celebration continued. Christina approached Lewis with news that would change his life in an entirely different way. "Lewis," she said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you." "What?" "I'm pregnant." Lewis stared at her in shock. After months of helping Mateo grow from boy to man, Lewis was about to become a father himself. "Are you ready for this?" Christina asked. Lewis looked across the paddock where Mateo was celebrating with Eduardo, Rosa, and his grandmother. The young man who had started as a desperate street racer was now a Formula One winner, surrounded by family who loved him. "I've been training for it without knowing it," Lewis said, pulling Christina close. The evening sun broke through the clouds over Sao Paulo, casting golden light across the circuit. In the paddock, 3 generations of racers stood together. Eduardo, whose dreams had been lost and found again through his son; Lewis, who had discovered that true greatness meant lifting others up; and Mateo, who had proved that with talent, determination, and the right mentor, impossible dreams could become reality. Rosa watched them from across the paddock, thinking about her best friend Maria and the letter that had started it all. Maria's words echoed in her mind. "Your father gave you his talent. I tried to give you his strength. Together, I hope we gave you everything you need to chase impossible dreams and catch them." The dreams had been caught. The promises had been fulfilled. And the legacy would continue. As fireworks lit up the Sao Paulo sky in celebration of their hometown hero, Lewis Hamilton realized that this was what he had been searching for all along. Not another championship for himself, but the knowledge that he had helped create something bigger than any individual success. Mateo Santos held his winner's trophy, while Lewis held his own trophy for 3rd place. Both men were exactly where they needed to be, having found something more valuable than individual glory: purpose, family, and the promise of tomorrow. The Hamilton Legacy program had succeeded beyond everyone's wildest dreams, proving that sometimes the greatest victories come not from beating others, but from lifting them up. That we'd love to know. Where are you listening from today? Drop your location in the comments below. Whether you're in London, New York, Mumbai, or anywhere else in the world, stories like this remind us that kindness and mentorship can transform lives across all borders. If this story touched your heart and inspired you, please hit that like button. It really helps us reach more people who need to hear these messages of hope and determination. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for many more interesting stories like this one. We share tales of courage, sacrifice, and the incredible things that happen when we choose to lift others up instead of tearing them down. And here's something really important. Please share this video with your friends and family. In a world that often focuses on competition and individual success, stories about mentorship and kindness need to spread far and wide. Your share could be exactly what someone needs to hear today. Together, we can spread kindness and awareness, one story at a time. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next incredible story.